Team Silence and Dostoevsky's use of horror help us appreciate the light even more when it surfaces from beyond the clouds. After all, Dostoevsky's original tale is paid respect and seen in the title of the 3 books written in this essay: Crime and Punishment and Redemption. The tales wouldn't be complete without it, so let's discuss it.
Book 3.
Redemption. How can we save ourselves from our transgressions, finding peace, self-respect, and love? What is redemption? Dostoevsky and Team Silent take us on a very intimate journey through our own heads in an effort to help average people come together against the evils created within the mind. Dostoevsky's deeply packed text is given so much flavor, like a fine cut of meat, with its use of dual meanings, in a way that helps lift the heavy weight felt when reading Crime and Punishment, which is slightly long and boring at times, to be honest, but an otherwise great story. Its 6 books function like acts in a play, slowly diving deeper into the mind of a killer. Raskolnikov is interesting and relatable because the entire book we're placed in front of him and forced to observe his every twitch, his every blink, as he is consumed by guilt. Silent Hill 2 brilliantly packs literary understanding and narrative into its story well before other video games were reaching for status as captivating art. It cleverly uses psychological and narrative reasonings for its gameplay loops to keep the immersion unbroken throughout its shorter runtime of about 8 hours. James grips us for the same reason as Raskolnikov, but Silent Hill 2 achieves the same effect by going in reverse order. Players initially trust James and empathize with his desire to find Mary. Slowly diving into James's mind forces players to realize more and more that James has been lying to the player and to himself. By the end of these 2 unique horrors and pages of text, we are all left with the same question that started my research. Can we be redeemed from the evil we commit? Crime and Punishment and Silent Hill 2 both say yes. But they also both say no. Dostoevsky uses character differences to create a spectrum of beliefs and behaviors. He then uses parallelisms between characters to show Raskolnikov, as well as readers, where he can end up on that spectrum and where his actions can take him if left unchecked. 𝕍𝕀𝕍𝕍 is what happens when Raskolnikov acts on his intelligence but follows the Übermensch to deadly extremes. He is the example of someone not receiving redemption from his crimes. Petrovich is what happens when Raskolnikov acts on his intelligence but follows his intelligence to utter new words in the name of good. He is an example of someone achieving that godlike level of excellence but not succumbing to the temptation of power. Sonya is what happens when Raskolnikov uses his intelligence to tame his emotions, combines the two in a way that forms the belief that everyone deserves love, and uses his intelligence to provide for those he loves. Team Silent uses the same strategies when brilliantly comparing James to his side characters. Eddie is the younger, fatter version of 𝕍𝕆𝕍𝕍. He's an example of what happens when James permanently gives in to murderous rage. A failed Übermensch, Eddie grows more and more psychotic, showing us the devastating consequences of overstepping morals. Angela is an example of what occurs when one feels their crimes have gone too far over the line to absolve. She's a murderer, but her crimes might have actually been seen as more justifiable than James's. She did murder, but she murdered her sexually abusive father, likely to end the cycle of trauma. Despite her crimes being less criminal, or at worst equal to James, we see her succumb to the flames of judgment. She effectively commits suicide by stepping further and further into the blazed hotel, very reminiscent of 𝕍𝕆𝕍𝕍's send-off to America. Silent Hill 2 goes one step further in displaying the spectrum of possibilities for the main character. There are 3 serious endings, 4 on a New Game Plus playthrough of Silent Hill 2, but we're going to leave the 4th out since it cannot be ludonarratively driven there on a first-time playthrough. Having multiple endings means we can compare and contrast the parallels between the different characters of James against himself, just as we would compare Raskolnikov to a side character. The entire game of Silent Hill 2 is effectively a psychological experiment asking, will the killer admit his sins and willingly accept punishment? Each playthrough is given an ending depending on real choices the player makes within the game. Meaning, Silent Hill 2 could provide a psychological study, just like Crime and Punishment, while simultaneously letting the player build their own, unique, fine-tuned psychological study. Silent Hill 2 qualifies your decisions within the game by allowing you to affect the outcome of the protagonist. James's outcome, then, is in direct alignment with what each player decision might have meant within James's mind. Every game, the game takes player choice, player direction, and player skill into account, asking, is James acting reckless? Is James even looking for his wife? Does he even care about her anymore? Or does he just want to find another Jezebel to satiate his desire for sex and attention?
When will you ever stop making that mistake?
If a player loses a lot of health and stays near death conditions, he might receive the in water ending, committing suicide.
Now we can be together.
My interpretation is that James weighed in hard and found he could never stop loving Mary, but was too weak to comprehend the concept that he would only find life again through confession and absolution. He could not handle the weight of guilt and decided he could never go on living without Mary.
No, James. I won't let you. I'll never let you have your Mary back.
In an attempt to be with her again, and in his own pain, selfishly, he drives his car off into Toluca Lake. Revitalizing love for Mary was noble, but his cowardice and weakness meant he was never to be at peace again, until he found soothing slumber in his eternal rest under Toluca Lake.
Now we can be together.
If a player tries to find his wife quickly, relishing in any memory of hers presented, James can accept his guilt and his punishment and move on. This is seen in the leave ending, or the only one interpretable as good. My interpretation is that he finds a unique symbol of hope and future days in the sassy little girl Laura, taking her with him as a daughter, a successor to his legacy. Him leaving town with her means that he has successfully stared into the abyss, just like the story of the heroic artist, and saw the truth. Instead of cowering, James accepted the truth and allowed it to flow through him. His reward was the last living memento of his dead wife, Mary's pseudo-adopted daughter Laura, that she fell in love with at the Brookhaven Hospital. Lastly, if James acts disinterested in his late Mary and more interested in Maria, he's able to leave town with her in the Maria ending. A subtle yet powerful ending ensues.
Come on. Let's get out of here.
What about Mary?
It's okay. I have you.
They're walking back to James's car outside town, and Maria coughs hard right before they cut to credits. "You should get that cough checked out," he says. Kind of aggressively, honestly.
You'd better do something about that cough.
This leaves James's decision in ambiguity. Players might have thought this was a good ending initially, as James is leaving town, and he rescued somebody who happens to be extremely sexy and practically created to serve him on his quest. Is Maria really having a hangover like she said? Or is she meant to suffer and die just like Mary? My interpretation is that in this ending, James was overtaken by his selfishness, his lustful energy, and on top of that, also never learned the most valuable lessons, that his wife was worth loving, and her life was worth living, no matter the suffering.
I don't know why, but I just love it here. It's so peaceful.
He takes the hot doppelganger to his wife, but in this Dionysian decision, he hasn't accepted punishment for his sins as truly as he might believe. This dualism between the story's many psychoanalyses and the player's fine-tuned psychoanalytical experience helps Silent Hill 2 ascend above many other video games as an actual, respectable work of art and interactive literature. Also, if James actually left town with her, she straight up is gonna die. I'm no prophet, but the cough seems pretty clear-cut to me. If James takes her and leaves town with her, she's gonna die, and he's gonna suffer all over again. Both tales, after drilling deep to their cores, finally present us the answers to the thematic questions presented in the beginning. What happens when someone commits murder? As Raskolnikov puts it, they get what they deserve. Do they suffer for their sins, either in their own secular context or in their own religious context? If they have a conscience, they will suffer. If they feel sorry for the victim, they will suffer. Is punishment necessary? Yes. Because punishment is a form of suffering, and we suffer that we may be redeemed through it. Is punishment even real? Again, if they feel sorry for their victim, they will suffer. That is also to say, is crime real? The answer is a resounding yes. When we choose to believe it doesn't, that would mean right and wrong don't exist on a fundamental, primordial level. They exist only superficially because we created them. And at that point, even the most vicious acts can be rationalized and justified as the best action. So, what happens when you justify? murder? Does suffering continue, or does it disappear because you don't feel sorry for your victim? Just like 𝕍𝕀𝕍𝕍𝕆𝕐, when you justify pure evil like murder and pretend right and wrong don't exist, you'll be condemning yourself to a fate worse than death. Does morality even exist? Yes, it does. Every character, even 𝕍𝕀𝕍𝕍𝕆, realize, even if it's too late, that morality is way too fundamental to pretend like it doesn't exist. We can use these insights as ambrosia to the soul, food for the spirit, and grow from them. People of all kind, including you, including me, are capable of intelligent, kind, and creative acts. But every single one of us is also capable of selfish, deceitful, and murderous acts as well. We all have a choice to make in life. It's a fundamental choice, a primordial choice, an archetypal choice, bound to our souls from the moment we were conceived. We all suffer. Life is suffering. Life is hard. Life is challenging. Life is brutal. But life is worth living. So then, how will you be redeemed from suffering? Thank you.
Mary.